I, Calon, son of Lycaon, grew up in a small village that awoke with the first rays of the sun. His name was like a voice echoing through lands forgotten by time. Each morning the mist rising from the valley mingled with the whispers of the olive trees, whispered to me of an ancient past and a peaceful present. And I was a child of that land, my destiny still unknown, my soul still free from the shadow of war. It was a time of year when people still trembled under the shadow of the gods, believing they found fruitfulness through their grace. The fields surrounding our village symbolized not only the land itself, but also fertility and a life forged through labor. Every spring, as daffodils and poppies adorned the field's edges, the fertile fragrance rising from the depths of the earth whispered of life's eternal cycle. My father, Arian, was a farmer, his arms calloused, his face lined by sun and wind, a man attached to the earth. His hands were as hard as the earth, yet as soft as love. Every seed that fell in the fields sprouted through his determination, and the drops of sweat shed at every harvest were like a sacred effort that gave life to our family. My mother, Milena, with her boundless faith in the gods, was like a light illuminating our hearts. Her whispers became prayers, every step a gesture of gratitude. She always believed that the lofty inhabitants of Olympus watched over us, that every blessing was their blessing. The tales she told us by the fire in the evenings intertwined with the glorious victories of the gods and the destinies of mortals. My two sisters, Ione and Thea, were as joyful as the first flowers of spring, their laughter fluttering like butterflies over our fields. Together, we played games and picked blueberries on the narrow paths of Philea among the olive groves. Every morning, as soon as I woke, I would connect with the earth, run through the fields, inhale its scent, and feel the wind caress my hair. But my growing childhood had its greatest desire, a wish that echoed within me like a lion's roar, to be a warrior. I was only 5 years old, but the fire burning in my heart whispered the beginning of a journey far different from the tranquil days of Philea. On those happy days spent with my family, as I walked through the fields, the rusty hilt of my father's old sword hanging on the wall would take shape in my mind. I longed to be a hero as powerful and fearless as the gods. At night, I would lie beneath the stars, dreaming of the distant echoes of Olympus, replaying the epics of heroes in my mind. The courage of Achilles, the cunning of Odysseus, all of them would shatter Philea's tranquility with a whisper. In my adolescence, Arian, that ancient warrior, began teaching me the intricacies of the sword. The first time I held the sword in my hand, the weight of the cold metal sunk into my heart, as if the silence of years had been broken in that moment. Every blow, every swing was a discipline that trained not just the muscles, but also the soul. My father, that ancient warrior, sought mastery in every movement. The sword isn't just a weapon, Calon. It's an extension of your soul, he would say. The villagers respected him, heeding his words for his past courage and his present wisdom. Among those who listened to him were some who spoke of the gods with fear, and others, like my father, who questioned them. Sometimes there would be silent disagreements between my parents. These arguments echoed off the walls of our home, planting in me the first seeds that the gods could be both sublime and sometimes incomprehensible. Milena professed her love for the gods, bound by an unwavering devotion to their absolute power and justice. Arian, however, sometimes rebelled against the gods, questioning their decisions by saying, "Their shadows are sometimes longer than their light. Their justice sometimes ignores the suffering of mortals."
he would add in a whisper, his eyes distant. Growing up, I was caught between two worlds. On one side, the sacred gods, the ancient powers that governed our lives, the invisible power echoing in my mother's prayers. On the other, a world as real as the earth, molded by human blood and sweat, a tangible reality shaped by my father's calloused hands. The first day my father gave me the sword, there was a light in his eyes. War tests a man's spirit, but the earth timbers it, he would say. Every movement symbolized not only the struggle against the enemy, but also the struggle within oneself. When I trained with the sword, my sweat would mix with the earth. This was the first time my soul, the earth, and the war had merged.
I, Kalen, was now 25 years old. The years had flowed like the rivers running through the valleys of Philia, carrying away the innocence of my childhood and the scent of the fields along with them. On the day the sun rose, the earth beneath my feet was still warm and fertile. The smell of wheat rising from our fields whispered the most beautiful, most peaceful memories of my childhood. Yet there was a strange, invisible, intangible weight in the air, as if the darkest clouds of Olympus were preparing to descend upon Philia. The wind no longer carried the sweet whispers of the olive trees or the familiar scent of the soil. Instead, it brought a sharp, bitter smell of metal and sweat from afar, as if an invisible army had reached the gates of our village, its breath upon our necks. Even the morning birdsong seemed quieter, as if they had retreated into their nests, waiting for the approaching hum, the beginning of a moment when even nature fell silent. And then that day came, the hum that tore apart the seemingly endless peace and ancient order of Philia. The troops marching to Troy arrived at our village through dusty roads. From dusty trails with the neighing of horses and the creaking of armor, the military caravans of Mycenae and other Achaean cities appeared. They came together, commanders from Mycenae, clad in ornate, shining armor dazzling in the first light of the sun. Their faces beneath their helmets did not show the weariness of long campaigns, but rather a cold determination and iron will. Their swords in their sheaths looked like threats themselves. Behind each one hung the fate of thousands of mortals. Their feet were strange on the soft, fertile soil of Philia, as if they were accustomed not to this land, but to the rocky paths of destruction and conquest. Their gazes were confident, cold, and absolutist, as if they carried the gods' commands directly from Olympus. In the village square, addressing the gathered crowd with a proclamation whose every word fell like hammer blows. Young men from every village were to be gathered, at least one son from every family. This was not an offer, but the cold voice of an ancient law that accepted no objection, the order of a tradition lasting centuries. The gods, they said, with absolute certainty allowing no doubt, the gods have decreed. Helen's abduction was only an excuse, a spark. Underneath lay an honor debt accumulated over generations, perhaps a new act in the endless game the gods play over mortals. We, mere mortals, were just pawns in this great game, dragged along by our fate, knowing that our destiny flowed like leaves in a river into the unknown, but powerless to change anything. The weight of this truth was like a fist tightening in my chest. My father, Arion, rose early that morning.
Normally, he would awaken with the rising sun to go to the fields, his face carrying the promise of the land's abundance. But that day his face bore not the usual farmer's resolve, but a deep calmness, a silent weight brought by acceptance. He said nothing. Words seemed caught in his throat, as if what he wanted to say could not carry the weight of this silent farewell. He only sat on the old moss-covered rock behind our house, the quiet place I had known since childhood, where he sought refuge in every sorrow and difficult decision. The coldness of the stone perhaps soothed the storm in his soul, the cry inside him. As I put on my armor, feeling the cold metal, I noticed his gaze upon me. Reflected in the mirror, my face showed none of my childhood traces. Instead, a strange weight I could not yet understand had taken their place. My father's eyes were far from the usual anger, fatigue, or hardness. For the first time there was no fear, but deep regret and unspeakable sorrow. As if he could see the future, knowing much more than I did, carrying the weight of all that was to come alone. It was as if he bore the weight of an empire on his shoulders. When I approached, breaking the silence like a knife, he turned to me and touched my shoulder with trembling hands. From his fingertips, the weariness of years and the heaviness in his heart passed to me, as if infecting my soul and sharing his sorrow with me. "I too once went to war, Galen," he whispered, his voice rustling like a dry leaf, a memory lost in the wind. "I was young too. The fire inside me was like yours. I know well the feast of swords, the dance of screams, the warmth of blood, the intoxication of victory, the pain of defeat. I have tasted it all. But when I returned, Philia was not the same. The world was not the same. A part of my soul remained on that battlefield. It did not return. Like seeds sown in the soil, it was planted in the bloody fields of war and rotted there. Neither my mother nor my siblings nor I, we had all changed. War was a disaster that withered souls and drowned the past. And now I send you off on that same path with the same silence. Never forget, the shadow of victory can outlast the pain of defeat. What they call heroism is sometimes just a thin veil covering losses, leaving behind only an empty victory." 2 tears slipped from his eyes, trailing down his cheeks and falling to the ground, absorbed like a sacred drop. My father never cried. I had never seen him cry before. Ariane's face was always hard as stone. This was not the Ariane I knew. This was a man changed by war over the years, withdrawn into his shell and cloaked in silence. At that moment, I felt as if I was going not to war, but into another darkness where souls were drawn, like a tunnel of no return. With every step, the childish warrior desire inside me shrank before this new painful reality, replaced by an unknown anxiety. My mother, Milena, with her unwavering faith, took me to the small altar stone on the edge of the olive groves. The first rays of the sun filtered through the olive leaves, sparkling like the tears of the gods, each drop a prayer. She knelt, and I knelt beside her. I could feel her hands trembling, her fingers interlocked, but her voice still called to Olympus with the clarity of a river's flow, full trust in the gods. She still believed in Zeus's power, Athena's wisdom, Apollo's healing. That faith had rooted in her soul. I, however, was no longer sure. My father's regret cast a shadow on my mother's faith, sowing the first seeds of doubt in my mind. My eyes turned to the sky, but the silence of Olympus only deepened the doubt in my mind. "May the gods protect you, Kaelin," she said, and I felt her unwavering love wrap around me like the last refuge of my childhood. She rested her head on my shoulder, her breath a comfort at my neck. "But never lose your heart. Protect your soul more than your sword, because war wounds the body, but consumes the soul. Remember, the greatest battle is within oneself, against one's own fears and anger. Keep the light inside you. Do not let the darkness envelop you." Those words echoed inside me like a prophecy, a warning to my future self waiting behind a storm that would last 10 years. It was not only a mother's prayer, but also a guide for my soul's future trashel. Milena's faith was my last light in Philia. My 2 younger sisters, Ione and Thea, sobbed behind us, hugging me with their small bodies. Their pure tears fell silently on my shoulders, like olive leaves, melting away the innocence of Philia, drop by drop. The last warmth I felt in their small bodies was the last memory of Philia, never to return. They stroked my hair, wiped my face, and their last kisses left a deep mark on my soul. We embraced for the last time. Last. What a simple word, a short syllable of 4 letters, and how cruel. It carried the farewell of a lifetime, the fear of the unknown, all the love left behind, a devastating word. At that moment, time seemed.
After days battling stormy seas, the ship slowly approached the shores of Troy. Standing on the deck, I felt the salty breath of the wind against my face. My heart was not pounding with the weight of the moment, but with an indescribable speed. It was as if a bird flapped its wings inside me, yet had no idea where to fly. On the horizon, the sun's fading red glow stained the sky like spilled blood, and the towering, majestic walls of Troy emerged like a titan's silhouette. Even from afar, the stones whispered millennia of history, untold secrets, and the doom that was to come. At that moment, on the brink of the war I had dreamed of as a child for years, I felt the certainty that I could no longer be a child. The very ground beneath my knees seemed to give way. This was no game of imagined heroism, but a reality where my soul would be tested, my body torn apart. My closest friend Theros, on the other hand, was brimming with the youthful courage and perhaps, yes, the blissful ignorance of adventure. His eyes burned with fire, his face bloomed with the promise of the quest that would start the next day. Whispering, he said, "Kaelin, do you see it? There, Troy! The gates of history open before us." His voice echoed in the wind, carrying the excitement of an entire army alone. He was filled with dreams of glory and victory, convinced the gods watched over us and accompanied us. I silently clenched the cold hilt of my sword, my fingertips white from the grip. A deep unease stirred inside me, a storm raging in the depths of my soul. My father's last look heavy with grief and regret. My mother's prayers faint as if unheard. My sister's silent tears crashing down like avalanches of innocence. These crushed my heart. Just thinking of how their innocence would be trampled by this bloody war terrified me. When we landed, the sound of the waves mingled with the rustle of sand beneath thousands of marching feet. The cold, salty sea air seemed to cleanse my lungs, but brought with it an unknown fear. Here we are, on enemy soil,
and every grain of this land whispered danger to us. The commander's muffled orders filled the shore. "Move swiftly! We will pillage the small villages on the road to Troy for supplies to break their morale." How simple that command sounded! A mere order, an ordinary task. Yet this simple command would shatter my childish dreams and mercilessly reveal the true face of war. At the first village the sun had set, leaving the pale light of the moon. Amid the silence, the echoes of our thousands of footsteps resonated. Fearful eyes watched us from windows, trembling at the narrow cracks of curtains and closing doors. Among women, children, and the elderly, there was helplessness. The ancient fear etched on their faces saw the destruction of their worlds. Their gazes were like spears piercing my heart, accusations directed at us warriors who shattered their lives and unturned their worlds. How easy it was to destroy their lives, to ravage their homes. Fires began to rise, first from one house, then another. Red smoke blackened the sky, and the crackling of burning wood deafened my ears. Doors were kicked open, the sounds of belongings breaking, children's screams and women's cries filled the air. In every flame, something else burned inside me. The realization that the glorious war epics I'd heard since childhood were nothing but pain and destruction. Glory and fame meant nothing next to this burning stench and these screams. This was not the war of gods on white steeds. This was the war of blood spilled on the earth and smoke rising to the heavens. My friend Theros swung his sword, his eyes shining fiercely. His face was bloomed with a wild excitement fed by this destruction, as if he had become one with war itself. "Victory, Kalen! Victory!" he shouted. His voice cut through the chaos. His joy and enthusiasm felt alien to me, as if an invisible wall had risen between us. My father's words echoed in my ears like a prophecy. "Do not crush the weak. Every life is sacred." But we were doing exactly that. With swords, with ambition, with the cruelty of the strong, crushing the innocent. Where were the gods' commands in this slaughter? Was this cruelty their divine justice? That night, sitting around the campfire, I looked up at the endless ancient stars. They shone in the same pattern for thousands of years, indifferent to all the chaos in the mortal world. Inside me, a battle began between my mother's unwavering faith in the gods and my father's sorrowful gaze. Were the gods truly with us? Or were they merely spectators standing beside the strong? In the shadow of rising smoke, these questions gnawed at my soul. Or perhaps they, like us, chased only their own interests. With that growing doubt, I lay on the cold ground, unable to sleep. Theros still saw war as an adventure, perhaps dreaming of Troy's gold. I knew this adventure would be filled with pain, loss, and eternal regret. Even if we returned, our souls would never remain the same. Each day, as we neared Troy's towering walls, the war within me grew. I was not only fighting the enemy, but warring against myself and my beliefs. Every burning house, every scream I heard, killed a bit more of the idealistic child inside me. There was no turning back. The bridges back to Philia were burned. When I closed my eyes, my family's faces, the warm soil of our home, and the cold metal touch of the old sword my father gave me flickered in my mind. The sword was no longer a symbol of heroism, but a curse that clung to me. Our camp was set near the shore of Troy, a fragile, uncertain home in small stone huts along the coastline, cast in the shadow of war and doubt. Each night, under the mighty dark silhouette of Troy's walls far away, my thoughts stole my sleep. How many lives waited behind those walls? How much innocent blood would be spilled? My young warrior spirit began to question, where was this path leading? What was the price of victory? Was what we fought for worth all this destruction? Were the gods on anyone's side, or were they just watching? And most importantly, who am I now? Among all these questions, the most painful was the future of my closest friend, Theros. We had set out on this path together, from the same village with the same dreams. Now we faced the cruel fate of war. How long could Theros' innocent joy withstand this dark reality? The unknown was our only certainty. And a voice whispered inside me, "This is only the beginning."
As the sun disappeared behind the walls of Troy, the sky turned into a deep, pitch-black darkness. The crescent moon hung faintly like a pale nail in the sky, its light not guiding the earth, but seemingly leading into the underworld, into the depths of Hades. That evening, the innocent nights of Philia, the peace filled with whispers of olive trees, felt worlds away. In this land now, only the shadow of war ruled, a shadow that swallowed everything, that darkened all. The air was heavy with the breath of thousands of soldiers, filled with the sense of sweat, fear, and impending death. The ancient dead sleeping beneath the ground were disturbed, as if a murmur rising from their graves whispered the beginning of this new chaos. War, in all its savagery and mercilessness, was about to begin irreversibly. The chorus rising from the Achaean camp was less a battle song and more the sorrowful whispers of men marching toward their fate, each note a lament for lost hope. Thousands of soldiers, each forged by their own fears and hopes, approached like iron walls, wielding shields and sharp swords. With every step, the creaking of armor and clashing of spears echoed like a symphony of the impending apocalypse, a deafening, soul-shaking symphony. The earth itself trembled, not from footsteps or war cries, but seemingly from its own pain, burdened by the weight of the blood soon to spill upon it. Caelen's heart pounded wildly within his chest like a caged beast. The beat was so loud it echoed in his ears, hammering into his mind like a drum. With every breath he tasted the salty sweat and sharp scent of iron, the bitter flavor of the approaching bloodshed. His mother's final words, "Protect your soul more than your sword," turned over and over in his mind like a haunting refrain, shaking his spirit. At that moment, their meaning struck him to the bone. The first assault began with the first light of the moon, a scream tearing through the sky. Under Agamemnon's command, bows were drawn taut, strings stretched, and arrows flew like a black flock of birds across the sky, whistling sharply toward their targets, harbingers of death. Defenders atop Troy's walls and Achaean soldiers in the front lines raised their shields with the last strength granted by the gods. Arrows bounced off iron and bronze, whistling through the air before embedding in the earth, each one a gravestone.
Sometimes a body shuddered under the lightning strike of an arrow, collapsing with a pained cry, blood soaking the soil. Kalen cast aside his hesitation, the last shards of innocence from his childhood, drew his sword from its sheath, and lunged forward. The sharp tip of his blade gleamed in the moonlight like a predator's claw, its edge cutting even his own soul. Beside him, his closest friend Theros charged into the enemy lines with brave childlike enthusiasm, eyes still burning with unextinguished fire. In his gaze sparkled the thrill of adventure from Thylia, the dream of glory and victory, as if this bloody war were but a game. Together, shoulder to shoulder, side by side they fought, never once stepping back, bound by an ancient oath. Their swords danced through the air, the ringing of metal striking helmets deafening, like the wildest movement of an orchestra. Kalen surrendered himself to the whirlpool of battle. Every strike, every counterattack became instinct. He no longer thought, he fought like a beast, focused only on survival. Yet the true face of war lay far beyond the glorious duels and noble ideals told in the heroic tales mothers whispered in childhood. Here was only blind violence, senseless destruction, only screams, blood, earth, and sweat intertwined. Every step soaked with the warmth of mingled blood and mud, the scent of decay lingering. The fear in the eyes of his enemy reflected the human within himself, echoing inside Kalen's soul. As he struck down foes, a battle also raged within him. In this horror, his beliefs shattered, crumbled like sandcastles. Was this conflict ruled by the gods' grace or by nothing but pain? In this sea of blood and tears, he saw not a drop of divine favor. Each sword stroke opened another wound in his spirit. With every fallen enemy, a piece of his own soul seemed lost. His father's words echoed like prophecy in his mind. The shadow of victory may last longer than the pain of defeat. Each day this prophecy grew more tangible. Days, weeks, months, even years passed in this hell. Calendars lost meaning, time's flow bent to the merciless rhythm of war. Nights were neither dark nor silent. Though the sky sparkled with stars, the red glow of fires rising over the walls of Troy where shadows danced never faded, burning like the flames of eternal hell. Under the campfire's flicker, weary soldiers sat upon the muddy earth, shoulders burdened with the weight of the world, and whispered the names of fallen comrades. Each name a sob, every memory a pain. They tended wounds and listened to moans, but seemed to have forgotten hope. Hope had become another victim of this war. Kalen saw in Theros' eyes the unyielding excitement of battle, that innocent thrill still alive, as if he were still the child from Thylia, preserving his purity even in these bloody lands. But the endless pains of war, the growing losses, the daily news of death wore on Kalen, scorching his soul. His warrior self now fought only to survive, having seen how hollow and deceptive glory and fame really were. One night, during one of the most bloody clashes before Troy, lightning split the sky, thunder mingled with the clashing swords, as if even the gods shared this horror. At that moment, war's merciless and personal face stood bare before Kalen. Theros was gravely wounded. While Kalen tried to shield him with his own shield, a sly arrow, having slipped past the spear's point, sank into Theros' shoulder. Kalen watched the venom spread.
darkening his friend's flesh as if painted with the ink of death. Theros' anguished cry pierced the roar of battle and struck Kalen's heart, becoming a sound that would echo forever in his ears. Time seemed to freeze. The clatter of swords ceased. The smell of blood faded. Screams turned to silence. Only Theros' groan and his own breath remained, along with the merciless pounding of his heart. In that moment, Kalen felt to his very core that war was no heroic legend, but loss and pain. This reality spread through his soul like poison. The innocence that once shone in Theros' eyes was now filled with suffering, fear, and the slow fading of life. Kalen's childhood dreams of warrior glory were watered with Theros' blood, shattered into pieces that would never be whole again. Theros' wounds opened not only on his body, but carved deep, unhealable scars in Kalen's spirit. As he carried his friend from the battlefield, every step bore the weight of burning villages, screams, and regrets, as if the sins of the entire Achaean army rested on his shoulders. From that moment on, Kalen began to question the meaning of war more deeply than ever before. "Are the gods truly with us?" he whispered to himself in a low, hopeless voice, a wish lost in the wind. "Or are we merely pawns crushed in the battle for power, puppets dancing in the shadows of gods, their entertainment?" The silence of Olympus screamed that these questions would remain unanswered. The gods seemed deaf. His mother's faith clashed with his father's regret, creating a growing fracture in Kalen's soul. The war continued, its merciless rhythm never ceasing like a dance of death. The walls of Troy were besieged time and again, each siege bringing a new hell, each worse than the last.
The relentless war that lasted 10 years flowed beneath the walls of Troy like a river of blood and tears. Neither the ancient walls nor the mighty heroes could halt the merciless current of time and fate. Finally, this saga that began like a dream and turned into a nightmare came to an end. The walls of Troy were at last destroyed. The ancient city was engulfed in flames, and the smoke rising to the sky was like a lament for an entire civilization. Troy was now a ruin made only of stone and ashes, harboring the echoes of thousands of lives and the whispers of thousands of cries. I, Kalen, had survived that war. My young and warrior spirit was weary, worn, and shattered. I was no longer the child who left Philia believing in innocence. In my eyes there was no longer a fire burning brightly, but a deep exhaustion, and indescribable fatigue, and a sharp questioning. The wounds in my soul were far deeper than the scars on my body. On the way back by the seashore, as we sailed home with the Achaean ships, the lands we passed were full of traces left by war. Walking among the small villages we had once pillaged and set aflame, each ruin weighed upon us like a ghost. The fields were burnt, unfit for crops, the houses destroyed, chimneys no longer smoked, and laughter no longer rose from the doors. Courtyards where children once ran joyfully were now cloaked in silence, filled only with the howl of the wind. Instead of children's laughter, there was a profound silence and a heart-wrenching sorrow. With every step, the ashes crushed beneath my feet ignited a new flame of regret within my heart. The warrior's fire inside me had died out like the burning and crumbling walls of Troy, replaced by pain, remorse,
and an undescribable emptiness. This void was larger than any victory could fill. My father Arion's words at our final farewell echoed like a nightmare in my ears. The spirit of war tests you, but the earth softens it. But at that moment, Galen understood that the earth was no longer the same. It had been watered with Troy's blood and woven with the tears of the innocent. Like the land, I too had been changed irreversibly by the pain of war. The faith within me had been lost among the dust and smoke of battle. The childlike, unwavering belief in the gods had been shaken, replaced with deep doubt and questioning. Every burned village, every lost life, every cry heard challenged the silence of Olympus. Why so much pain? Why do people break so easily? If this is the justice of the gods, then why this cruelty? Do they truly protect us, or are we merely pawns in their struggle for power? These questions echoed in the depths of Galen's soul, unanswered. After months of exhausting travel, when I finally set foot on the lands of my homeland, Philia, I searched for familiar scents, the fresh smell of olive trees and earth. But the first scent to reach my nose was salt from the sea and the smell of ships. Approaching the familiar stone arch at the village entrance, my heart beat with both hope and fear. From afar, I caught a faint glimpse of my family. On my father's aged face, there was no proud farmer's look anymore, but tears in his eyes, indescribable sorrow and weariness. I stood there as a son who had fought to survive, and he as a father mourning all that was lost. My return was bittersweet, one hand holding victory, the other an unbearable loss. My sisters Ione and Thea had grown, their childish joy replaced by the maturity brought by years, and the shadow of sadness on their faces. In their eyes one could read the longing, worry, and perhaps fear for their brother who fought far away. My mother Milani still prayed at the same altar stone. Her voice was still so pure, but the spark in her eyes had faded, replaced by endless patience. When I embraced her, I felt my wearied soul in her trembling hands. But I was no longer the same. The warrior boy who dreamed before going to war was gone, replaced by a man who had seen life's truths, endured pain, and questioned everything. My innocence had burned away with the ashes of Troy. At night, looking at Philia's familiar stars, the sky remained the same, but Galen's eyes were different. Every twinkling star reminded him of every battle, every loss, every sword stroke, and the death of his closest friend Theros. Theros' scream still echoed in his ears, aching his soul. He whispered his questions to the gods. Why Theros? Why did those innocent smiles fall silent? Who did this blood, this pain serve? Yet the Olympus was silent as ever. Their silence deepened the doubt within Galen. This journey had taught him not only how to fight and wield the sword, but what it meant to be human, to suffer, to lose, and perhaps most difficult of all, to forgive. First himself, then the gods. And with that wearied soul, in the lands of Philia, far from the war he had once dreamed, Galen decided to build a new life. He felt the mud of the fields in his hands, reconnecting with the fertility of the earth. Beneath the olive trees, confronting memories of his childhood, he realized that when the dust of war settles, The real battle is not against enemies outside, but against the battles within oneself. To fight fears, regrets, changing beliefs, and with the hope brought by a new beginning. And in that moment, perhaps for the first time, Kaelin's soul found true peace. Not a victory won by the sword, but an acceptance that rose from the depths of the spirit. A new Kaelin, son of Lycaon, was born, wiser, more weary, but more human.